Hey everybody. First, thank you all for coming today. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout for this event. Before we start, I just want to repeat the thanks to the amazing folks at TIFF, especially in the higher learning group, Keith, Jessica, and Teresa, as well as my home, which is the Cinema Studies Institute at the University of Toronto, for helping to really make this happen. So the way that this is going to work today is we're going to talk to our amazing guests about their work. We have a lot of clips to show that illustrates their work individually. And then once we do that, we'll open it up for a Q&A where you guys can ask some questions as well. But before we bring out and I introduce our guests, I thought we might start with a clip from a short film that was produced by one of our guests, Andy Malcolm, way back in the late 1970s about Foley artistry. What it does is, and the reason I chose it to begin the event is because it does a great job illustrating the physical and the creative elements that go into Foley practice. It is called Track Stars, and let's take a look. So, to help explain the world of post-production sound and what you have seen here, let's introduce our very special guests. Our first guest has been a Foley artist at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California for over 15 years. Her work has earned her a Primetime Emmy, 4 Golden Reel Awards. She is on the board of directors at the Editors Guild and is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Please welcome Miss Alyson Dee Moore. Our next guest has been a Foley Mixer at Warner Brothers for 25 years. She has won a Golden Reel Award and 3 Cinema Audio Society Awards. Please welcome MaryJo Lang. And finally, last but not least, our final guest has over 30 years of experience as an independent Foley artist, working here in Toronto, or just outside of Toronto. He has won a Primetime Emmy, 3 Canadian Screen Awards, 1 Gemini, 12 Genies, 3 Golden Reel Awards. He has worked with Canadian icons such as Guy Maddin, David Cronenberg, Norman Jewison, as well as Hollywood heavyweights including Tim Burton, Roland Emmerich, Judd Apatow. Please welcome Andy Malcolm. See if these are on. Okay. Andy, I thought I would start with you and ask a little bit about Track Stars and how it came about, and I also think that it works really well to illustrate almost as a calling card what you do. And I wonder if part of it had to do with trying to show this is what we do to public and also to other industry folks.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I wish I could do the soundtrack over again, but that was another story. But actually, I was working one night with Terry Burke on a David Cronenberg early movie, and there was a bunch of, it was a wrestling match, and it got out of hand. Everybody starts punching and throwing each other all over the place. And we had a ring set up. We had some rubber tires with some plywood and carpet on top. And I'm punching cabbages and meat and corn on the cob. And Terry and I looked over at each other. We just started laughing. And we went for a beer after and thought, well, we got to kind of show people what it is we do. So that's how it got started, actually.
Alyson, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, and I wonder what your elevator pitch is to explain to people, to students, to industry folks even, what do you do?
Sorry.
And how do you explain what a Foley artist does?
Well, I like to say that we do custom sound effects. So what we do is we do physically create all the sound effects. So if there's a body fall, we do a body fall in sync with what's happening on the screen. If someone's running on cement in high heels, we'll wear high heels. I'm sure Andy's got his high heels, a few pair. But everything is custom. We don't cut anything out of a library. That's something an editor would do. So if there are 10 body falls on dirt one day, and then the next day there are 5 more, we do 5 more. So it's specific to the project we're working on. And we always say if we do our job right, you shouldn't notice it. It should sound like it fits seamlessly into the production track. So that's why I think a lot of people didn't know what Foley was, because they just assumed that that sound came in with the original track.
And this practice goes back, obviously, to the transition to sound era in the 1930s, when there weren't these institutions or there weren't these practices set up at that point. So it was actually named after a fellow by the name of Jack Foley.
Yes, it was Jack Foley, who was an editor at Universal. And actually, all the editors would go in and do what was called their syncing sound effects. They would go to the stage and they would record their sound effects wild, not to picture. And he figured out that he could cut out a step. If he did it in sync, he doesn't have to go back to the room and cut it in. So he built a little stage, and they called it Foley stage. I'm going to go down to Foley's stage and do my syncing. And that's how it became a Foley stage. He never lived to see us become Foley artists, which is kind of sad, I think. But that's where the term came from.
And MaryJo, so you basically now, you are taking everything that Alyson and Andy are essentially performing, and you're recording it. But on a technical level, there's a lot more going on to what you do than simply pressing record. Can you take us through a little bit of now, as they're performing, what goes on in your mind? What are the kinds of choices that you're making, decisions that you're making as you mix?
Yeah, I don't watch what they're doing. I watch the screen. And that way I know if it's going to fit in or not. So I play with level, I have outboard equipment, plugins, I can make things sound bigger or smaller. And we have tricks to do with the microphone to make things sound bigger and smaller. And my job is actually, again, just to make it fit in with what you see on the screen. So if they're walking away from the camera, I play perspective as they're walking away. If they're in a big, we work with 2 mics. One's an ambient room mic, and the other one is focused on what they're doing. So if somebody's in a cathedral, big space, I would add a little bit more room just so that the mixers at the end can put in their ambient sound that they put on everything, and it just helps to fill it in, make it fit in a little bit more. And yeah, that's what I do.
And Foley artistry is very interesting to me because it seems like there's no one way to go about becoming a Foley artist, going into this as a profession. And there might be some in the crowd, excuse me, today, who say, well, this seems really interesting to me, but yet there's no real apprenticeship program. And I wonder how each of you basically got into this job in the first place. Andy, do you want to?
I got started, I wanted to be a picture editor, and I got a job as an assistant sound editor with these 2 Brits that had just come over to kind of kickstart the sound in the Canadian film business. So I was their assistant and running back and forth, and they didn't enjoy doing Foley, but they kind of knew they had to do some, and I would go, and in those days we used to do paper cue sheets, keep track of where everything is and what footage it comes in at and where it goes out and all that. So after a little while, they were all getting frustrated, and I was a kid, and I said, I'll try that, and it just kind of went from there.
Well, I got started by doing wardrobe. I was doing wardrobe for the Olympics when they were in Los Angeles in 1984, and one of the women that I was working with, her husband was a Foley mixer, and he invited me to the stage to say, you should see what we're doing, and I went, and I thought, this is the silliest thing I've ever seen. Why do they do all that stuff? I don't know. And then about a few weeks later, he called me and said, you want to be a runner here? Are you working? I said, no. And he said, well, we need a runner if you want to come by here and do that. And so I did, and they offered me an apprenticeship from there. And so that's how I got into it.
I also started out as an assistant, like Andy. And at that time, the guys I was working for went in and did their own syncing. So that's how I got introduced to the stage. But I also thought it was silly. I thought they were making fools of themselves up there. Thought there's no way I could go up and do that. I was very shy, but there were just about 20 people at the time doing Foley, and they needed people for fill-ins. So I was very lucky. I trained for a year. They actually paid me, which I think is unusual, and that was it. And it stuck.
And it's interesting to me, too, that very rarely, at least, are you individually working on a film. Usually you're paired off with somebody. Their Foley artists work in pairs, and I wonder if there's a particular logic to that or a reason why that is, or if it's simply inherited tradition in that way. I don't know if you can speak to that a little.
Well, I think in the beginning it really wasn't pairs. I think the first pair were, in Hollywood anyway, were a team, Kitty and Ross. Ross was an editor and Kitty was a dancer on Laugh-In. And a lot of dancers at that time did Foley because their timing was so good. So lots of us have a theatrical background, whether it's an acting background or dancing or some sort of, stage performance, because it is a performance. But as far as teamwork goes, I prefer to work with a team. There are some people that prefer to work alone. Just work-wise, the load is it's just exhausting to do all, we cover every single footstep. I mean, every principal that you see, every background person that's walking around. So it's very detail-oriented. And I also find with my partner, we are stronger at different things. Not that we both can't do the same things, but he's a little stronger at, other props than I am. So I think that's what makes a well-rounded team and a well-rounded product at the end.
Andy, do you have a similar?
In Canada, because when I started, there was nobody doing it, I just thought, well, you work by yourself. And in Canada, we basically work by ourselves. So. Except when we're doing group stuff, we'll get somebody in. We used to go out in the hall and grab somebody out of the hall and come in and do group feet, and other than that, or applause or something like that. But we work alone.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And I think one of the more interesting facets, and it's illustrated in track sounds, is the creative treatment of reality that Foley brings. And I wonder if each of you could sort of elaborate on sort of your relationship to that in the sense of you're not always utilizing, if ever, the actual prop that we see on screen to the prop that you are using to capture that. It's been parodied, and we've seen it on comedies and on television where characters are showing this, and the laughs that you get is because these things don't match up. And I wonder if maybe, Andy, you can highlight a little of that and maybe some interesting cases. We'll get to some in the clips we'll show, but I wonder if offhand you can speak
Well, I
to
can
that.
talk a little bit, but Alyson brought some props that you might want to do a little bit of a demonstration. But when again, going way back when I started, there was no props around, and you kind of had to sort of ad-lib and make it up as you went along. And a big part of putting a sound together is the layering of the soundtrack. So you would use all kinds of different props to make one sound. I mean, an obvious one is a horse and buggy, where you'll use we used to use coconuts. Now we use real horses' feet. But you do a track of, we do. We would do a track of the horse's feet, then we do the leather creaking and the bridle, and then got old rickety ladders that we do for the wagon and do the wagon wheels. And so it's a layering thing. And, when you don't have the right prop, you just make it up. It's just the nature of our business. For example.
I should have been prop ready, but so for breaking bones and things like that, lots of times we use celery that has a good cartilage sound to it, because it's really hard to break actual bones. It's hard to tell anything. So sometimes we take dried lasagna, for a good finger crack. I just used some the other day for some knuckle cracking. So just depending on how you manipulate, you can get a really good cracky sound. These are ice cream cones. I saw another Foley artist do this, and I totally stole that idea. And a lot of us get ideas from other Foley artists, you know. Some Foley artists are very proprietary. They're sort of like, I don't want to show you what I'm using because it's my little secret. And I think, really? Like, she's my secret. Because it's the way that MaryJo records things. You know, you can do, Andy and I can do the same thing on 2 different stages and use the same thing, can sound totally different. So these we like to use sometimes for like cracking out an egg crack or a bird pecking out of an egg. And it's just more control than if you have to actually use an actual egg, and it's less messy, which I don't like mess. This is called a Brayer. If anybody knows what that is, it's used to roll paint on things. And I was at a conference, and they were using it, and she goes, oh, I gotta get a new one of these. Listen to this. It's so squeaky. I was like, can I have that? I was like, sure, you know. And this is great for like, you know, a tricycle wheel, or like you were saying, a mouse on a mouse wheel, or you can put it up against a metal surface, get a squeaky door open. So it's like everyday items that you have no idea what they're going to sound like. I was going to ask Andy a question and I thought about this the other day, if you recognize other Foley artists' work from their sounds.
Oh, I can.
You can, yeah, because each Foley stage has their own specific sound effects. So
Yeah, we know your, like I haven't met these lovely ladies before, but I know their work for years and years. And yes, you can tell,
yeah, what
you know,
comes from what?
Foley artists and recording engineers for sure.
Yeah.
It's all an illusion. Now, you've all worked in animation. And what's interesting is, just to jump off sort of this idea of the creative treatment of real sound, animated film, you get a real opportunity, I think, to work with sound in a much more creative way than live action, because in a lot of ways, you're doing one of 2 things. You're either selling the animated image as being real, and adding a realish sound, if that's a word, or you are really extending that fantasy and adding sounds that, or creating sounds that are completely unreal and completely beholden to that sort of fantastic image. And so we have a few clips of different animated films that this trio have worked on. And the first I would like to take a look at is a National Film Board of Canada short. I think it was recently shortlisted by TIFF as one of the 100 greatest Canadian films of all time in the animation category. It's called When the Day Breaks. So let's take a look at this short clip from When the Day Breaks, and then Andy can tell us a little about it.
Well, as Ben said, the Foley and animation are a match made in heaven. It's definitely the most fun and the most creative is doing animated films, as I'm sure you guys agree. Yeah. And the thing about an animated film is there's way more Foley used in an animated film than in a live action film, or at least it's more apparent, it's more out front, and for obvious reasons, as we were talking about earlier, that everything is catered to that particular film. So, yeah, animation, it's just the best.
And you have a long-standing relationship with the National Film Board in terms of their animated division.
Yeah, I started at the National Film Board in 1983, and before they kind of went somewhat defunct, I probably did 40, 50 animated films there. And it's... That was a great thing about the Film Board. I'll just give a little plug for the Film Board, because they did such a variety of films there. There was documentaries, there was live action, there was animation, and they made amazing films. And, you know, it's kind of pared down these days, but what a great organization.
Now, Alyson and MaryJo, you both have a long relationship with 2 important animation studios, Walt Disney and Pixar. And what I'd like to do is actually show some clips from their work. First, we're going to start out with Frozen. And what we have actually is a before and after, a Foley-only track, and then a final mix track to see how their sound effects were mixed into the final film. And then we can come back and talk about the challenges and the interesting aspects of working with both of those studios. I absolutely love Olaf's squeakiness, which you would not assume would come from a snow creature of some kind. What was the decision behind that?
Cute. They just wanted him to be cute. So we used a couple of different things for the squeak. One was a little styrofoam peanut on a piece of glass. Get that really high-end squeak. And the other was a basket with a handle on it, and it was kind of broken, so it made a really good little squeaky sound. Again, one of those things where you just look around the Foley stage and say, oh, maybe that'll work. And then for the icicles, they wanted something magical, so we used, do we have we don't, or I can show it now. Okay, well, anyway, we used.
There's a clip of her manipulating.
I didn't
it.
know if they chose that one or not.
I think we have one with the fish.
Okay, perfect. So we used a glass wind chime, and MaryJo loves to travel and bring back some items, and we used this belly dancers just because it's pretty and it's magical sounding. So Disney's really into magical, as we all know.
All right, let's take a look at a second clip from Frozen. And I think this one illustrates, again, adding to this element of comedy with the particular character you'll see, but also grounding it or anchoring it in a sense of realism of manipulating objects and making that seem weighted and real at the same time. I was wondering too, so that's Walt Disney Studios. Now working with Pixar, we have a clip from Inside Out that I'd like to show, and then maybe both of you can speak to working with Pixar and any particular sort of challenges or interesting highlights of working on this film in particular. So let's take a look at Inside Out.
Well, obviously the memory balls were the big player there, and we used quite a few things before we came up with the right solution for what we were going to use for that. The supervising Foley editor brought in some stuff. He brought in a glass head, and and like a mannequin head, and so that was part of it. And I don't know what else you guys used.
Billiard balls, and for the, we just did a bunch of wild stuff, and they sort of picked, it's so emotional, and the memory balls, I think for different times, they use different things to just try to convey that, but especially for them when they're disintegrating, it was a little bit of sand on some glass with some 1/4-inch tape. There's just a lot of stuff that we kind of mixed together to get that sort of wispy, emotional sound. But I thought the memory balls, they did a great job. Once they wanted it to sound like nothing you'd heard before, so you couldn't identify, oh, those are billiard balls, or that's a mannequin head, or whatever it was.
But
And
one of the things from an outsider point of view is the attention to detail that these guys do. I mean, it's amazing. There's probably, in those sequences, there's probably at least 40 tracks going.
Oh, yeah.
And at least 40 tracks, just to give you an idea of how involved Foley can actually be. And these guys are masters.
You as well, Andy.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting, too, just from hearing you talk about whether it's a supervising sound editor or a director in some cases coming to you and requesting, I don't want you to know, I don't want even this to sound like anything you've ever heard of before. That seems to be a very common refrain, that they want something unique and original every time out. And I wonder if there is a way that you go about either convincing them that, yeah, this is original, we've used it only about 100 other times, and we can somehow tweak this, or if you do press yourself to try to come up with new ways of representing sound in that way.
Well, it's always nice to record something before they get there. So then they don't know if you've used that thing.
Right.
And then they love it. Oh my God, that sounds great. So we worked on the remake of The Wolfman, and the director was very insistent about no celery. I don't want any celery for any of the cartilage, the breaking bones, whatever, you know. Okay. So we used bok choy.
Yeah.
He loved it.
But Andy, you had a great story about that with the snow. You were talking about that.
Yeah, but with snow, yeah, we do. As Canadians, we know a lot about snow. So we did the film The Fast Runner, and the Foley had to be done in August, and we had to fool the Inuit. So that was quite a challenge. I don't know where I was going with that, but. Oh yeah, yeah. That's another thing we would do. We have hockey going all year round. So in Uxbridge, which is another thing I wanted to say, these guys working in a major center and people coming by all the time. It's great, but living in Uxbridge because nobody ever comes by. So, and it's true, you know, if they're looking and trying to see what it is you're doing, they'll always have some comment to make. But after it's done, then you know they'll usually love it. So it's the advantage of being way out in the country. Yeah. So part of the snow was what we use is cornstarch. I'll put like 24 boxes of cornstarch in a pillowcase, and we'll use some of that. We'll mix it with sand and various textures, and then we'll go down to the arena and get garbage pails full of the snow from the Zamboni, and we'll sort of kind of mix and match. And again, it's a big layering process, so in order to make it real. Then for skating and all the walking on the ice, we actually buy these sculpting blocks of ice. They're 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and a foot deep. Sometimes we'll drill holes, we'll put microphones. If we're doing a hockey sequence, skating, we'll put the microphones right inside the ice and record it with 2 or 3 different mics in different positions. So again, we're always kind of playing and making it up as we go.
Our last animation clip is, I think it's most of the short, if not all of it, is Feast, which, did it win?
Yeah.
It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. So let's take a look at that. So there is a lot of Foley in this. And I'd like to ask if, in terms of the difference between a feature, a Disney feature, and a Disney short, if there are different instructions, and if they come to you knowing there's going to be a lot of Foley for you in this, and how you approach that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in the beginning in animation, you always know there's going to be a lot of Foley because they only have the dialogue. That's all they've got. You know, they just got the actors' voices, or in this case, the dogs barking and whatever. So everything you hear, it needs to be added in. So you always know that that's the case.
And we had the director there with us. So he was, you know, of course, it was very personal for him. And there was a whole thing with the dog footsteps and how they should sound. And a dog has 4 feet, but when they run, you really only hear the first 2 feet. But he went, you know, it was of course, the dog was the big highlight. So that was the biggest challenge on that was for him, because you know, again, it's that don't look at me while I'm working, just see if it fits in emotionally. And I did bring the dog feet. I'll show you. I have one dog foot. Hold on. I feel like Mary Poppins here. So these are just basic gardening gloves with paper clips. And sometimes, I think everyone's a little different. I don't know. My Foley partner uses Lee press-on nails. That's his, but. And I think at the beginning when he was a puppy, we didn't use the gloves. We just used, because we figured he was a puppy, so maybe he was just a little cuter. But also everything we do is really over the top because, as you can tell, the Foley's there, and then they're laying on top of that music, and then they're going to lay on top of that dialogue and sound effects. So we have to really be a little over the top with our with the sounds, and then they're mixed together to sound more natural.
That is, in terms of over the top, that's a perfect segue to our next clip and our next genre, which is comedy and the creative treatment that you can have with sound in comedy. This is a clip from a film Andy worked on called Dodgeball. So let's take a look at Dodgeball. So I assume a lot of the wrenches and balls and some of the body hits are Foley here?
Yeah, that's all Foley.
Wow.
The one interesting thing, when he gets hit by the car, that's a lot of time there's combinations of Foley and sound effects. So we have car parts, and actually we bring cars right into the studio and we smash them up. But you also lay in a sound effect of a car hit too. So. Yeah, those are the thing about comedy that I enjoy so much is it's somewhere between live action and animation. It's got to be real and it's got to be transparent and all those things, but you can give it another 20% to make it funny, and that's why the wrenches are so funny, because it's probably 5 tracks of different metal sounds to make one impact, and it's just fun, and we laugh. When you're doing Foley, you kind of get involved in the film and the mood of the film. So if you're doing a horror film where you're, doing people getting their heads cut off, and you kind of, you leave work at the end of the day. But when you're doing a comedy, you're always up, and it's always enjoyable, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can always tell when it works when you just watch the reel back without dialogue, but the sound effects are funny. So I think that's always
And that's one of the ways you judge it. If we're doing a comedy, there's 3 of us in the room. There's one person doing the Foley, and then a recording engineer, and then someone who operates the computer. And if we laugh, then that's it. On to the next. And if there's a kind of reaction you did not quite right, you just keep going till you get it right.
Yeah, I'd say that's true for horror and that too.
Yeah.
If you do a sound and people go, oh, then that's it. That's a good thing.
That's the bok choy working. We have 2 clips left, and it's a final section that engages with blockbuster sound, or the idea of working on these large budgeted films. And I'd like to start with Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight films, which MaryJo and Alyson worked on, and we can talk a little about working on sort of large budget features like that, and and how Foley factors into that. So let's take a look at The Dark Knight. Can you tell us a little about working with Christopher Nolan and his sound crew, Richard King, and in particular on this film?
Well, we love Richard King. I mean, he's just a great supervisor, and we've had such a long-standing relationship with him that when he comes in, and he asks for something, the dialogue is so great because we understand what he's saying. A lot of our Foley tracks actually end up in the sound effects tracks on the dubbing stage, because Christopher Nolan is not a big fan of Foley, because I don't think he's heard good Foley before, but he's sort of stuck in his head that. So Richard puts a lot of things over in the sound effects tracks. And they all get played, which is nice. But there's another perfect example of big music, and you hear the cape fluttering, but it's very low, but it's there in the background somewhere. So again, those little things.
Yeah, and Alyson is the master of the cape. We did Superman movies, and we did both Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, and she's phenomenal at cape sounds, which
And
she
I
brought.
brought Batman's cape. So MaryJo actually got this piece of fabric. It's pleather because his outfit is really made out of nylon. The cape is not a very thick piece, but. And that's what we used.
And Andy, I'd like to talk a little about your relationship with Alice in Wonderland, and we have a clip of a work in progress that Andy has provided, giving us a sense of before special effects are added, or sort of in the process when he would get the film. So let's take a look at Alice in Wonderland. Now, the first thing that I notice is the incompleteness of an image if you get it like that, and the challenge of recognizing not only what needs to be done, but trying to envision a final image when there isn't one. And I wonder what sort of you bring to that, or how you go about.
Well, as these large budget projects progress, there's temp mixes all along the way. And sometimes we get like just a drawing on the screen, and they've got it timed out, and they want to hear the sound for that too. So that's taking it to the extreme where you just kind of, again, make it up. On a film like this, what happened in this particular case is normally, you get between 10 to 15 days to do a Foley track. This was a 50-day job because every day the animation would change. And one thing about animators, they always tell you when you're seeing a rough cut, nothing's ever going to change, and it always changes. So the timing, so essentially you have to do scenes over and over again. And for example, there was a fudder whacking dance in that, and every 5 minutes it would change, and there was nothing, and they're so complicated with the footsteps, and next day a new version would come in, and on it goes. So that's why some of these big budget films take so long to do. The other thing I noticed is there's some stuff out of sync in there, which I noticed. And this is the way we present. These tracks are what we present to the Foley editors. When you're working on an American film, they have Foley editors down there who take it and kind of fine-tune it, and then they'll drop the feet. If there's any feet on production, they'll drop the Foley feet on top of the production. So, they want us to leave a few things for them to do. We like to do everything and get it perfect, but there isn't time or budget for that kind of thing. So there are a few little things out of sync, but it's close enough that you get a sense of what's going on and whether it's going to work or not.
And what's fascinating about your career, Andy, in particular, is the relationships that you have been able to develop, I mean, especially on a film like this, directed by Tim Burton, and remain sort of local to Toronto, and how you've been able to, again, establish those relationships with major sort of studios and American filmmakers, but remain here. And I wonder if you could talk a little about...
Well, the great thing for us is digital sound. We always get our picture over the internet, basically, and whereas in the old days, it was all analog sound. We started working on 3-track, which was sprocketed 3-track. Then we graduated to 24-track. And the thing about 24-track is all the tracks are interlocked together. So if you do the perfect sound and it's 2 frames out of sync, you have to do it over again because you can't move it. So digital sound has been amazing, the way we get the picture, the way we send it away. And you can be anywhere in the world, essentially, and do sound now. And as I said before, the great thing is we don't get people kind of bothering us.
Right.
What I would like to do now is actually open things up for an audience Q&A. If anybody has a question, we do have microphones, so I would ask that you hold off until you receive a mic. Let's see, we have a question right here down front.
Okay, I had a question actually related to how you would do Foley when you're relating to adaptations of, say, video games or animated series which already have, say, distinctive sounds. So, let me just walk you through like a hypothetical example here. Let's say you're the Foley Mixer on the new Assassin's Creed film, which is going to come out in a couple of months. And in that film, the protagonist has a spring-loaded hidden blade, which is underneath his arm. And in all of the games going back to 2007, there's a very distinctive flicking sound, which the blade makes when it extends or retracts. It's been in all the games. That sound has never changed for a good 10 years. As a Foley mixer, would you try to get that uncompressed, maybe it's a FLAC file or something, that uncompressed soundbite from Ubisoft Montreal, the developers, or would you try to get your Foley artist to try and recreate the sound as closely as humanly possible and try to see if the fans don't recognize the difference?
Well, that would depend on the director, the producer, the sound designer, the supervising sound editor. If they wanted something different, we would do something different. If they already had that sound bite already, that sound file, they would probably just put that in.
Right.
They wouldn't ask us to reproduce it. They would have it already, and they would just lay it in independently of us.
And that raises the issue of video games, which I think is really interesting, how you all have worked on at least one video game. You've done The Dark Knight, Arkham, Halo. That's right. And Andy, you've done Red Dead Redemption, all of which are very sound heavy in terms of, pickups and walking and different environments and having to deal with those. Differences between film and video games, just offhand, if you could.
Also virtual reality. We just did our first virtual reality film, and essentially, I don't know about you guys, but we work the same way as we would on a film. If we're doing virtual reality, we'll work on an unwrapped picture. If we're working on a video game, essentially what we do is, I don't play video games, but when you get to a certain level, there's a film. What do you call those?
Cutscene?
No,
A what?
Cinematics.
A cinematic, right. So essentially, we don't actually do the game. We just do the cinematics. Then they take the sounds that we provide for the cinematics and use them in the game.
Oh,
Oh, boy.
yeah,
We started doing cinematics, but now we do in-game stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get a loop of a character, and let's say it's maybe a 4-second little clip of them, running, and then jumping, and cartwheeling, body fall, and they'll say, okay, we want this, and we want about 5 to 10 different varieties on 12 different surfaces. So on cement, on glass maybe, metal, resonant metal, dirt. I mean, it's really, we call them it's just a knee breaker, because all day long, it's like you're a robot, just doing this over and over again. So they're...
Yeah, and originally they wanted everything wild, and we don't work wild.
Yeah,
We are so focused on what we see on the screen, so they provided us these little loops to follow. So we do body falls again on metal, on dirt, on grass, on glass, on resonant metal, on dead metal, on. So it's a long day.
And started out like maybe one day, and I think Halo was 3 weeks. So that's how far they've come with. They realize sound is very important in those games.
Other questions? We have one in the front here. Oh, is there somebody else? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi there. So, Andy, you said you did the Red Redemption game sounds, right? Are you working on the sound for the second ones too? Coming out?
No, I think it's out already, isn't it?
No, it's being produced right now.
Oh, no, I wish. No, I don't think so.
And are there any things you're working on right now that's in production, like any games?
No, we're not working on games right now. We're starting into the virtual reality, which is kind of in the ballpark. But one of the things, the advantage of being an Uxbridge is I don't have people around. The disadvantage is that a lot of people want to be there. Like, I'm sure the gamer people want to be there. It's like when these guys did the Feast movie, the director's there. Like, a lot of times, people want to be there. It was like that doing commercials, too. The people always want to be there from the agency. So, it's a trade-off moving out to the country kind of thing. So, and it was a trade-off with the video games.
And a lot of times we work on video games, but they won't tell us what it is. And I don't work on video games, so I don't recognize, what that is.
We don't play video games, so we
So
don't
it's hard to
know what they are anyway. But they'll send us drawings of the characters and what their armor is or what their weapons are, or, you know, so we can, and what their feet look like, so we can get an idea of how to match that.
Who's next?
Yeah, you mentioned sound effects. How is that different than what you do? And also, what was the most difficult thing that you had to recreate?
Well, when we talk about sound effects, we're talking about cut sound effects. So what an editor would cut from a library, which would be anything from a car starting to a gunshot, birds, wind, backgrounds, things like that, cars crashing. So we might enhance the car crash with glass or the metal impact. For me, the hardest sound that I had to make, we worked on a film called Red Planet. So they were walking on Mars for the first time. So they wanted it to sound different. Of course, no one knows what that sounds like. But they wanted it to be soft and hard and squishy and crackly. And so we tried to do everything: wet sand, wet dirt, different things. And we ended up using, we had been working on E.T., the 25th anniversary. And for the sound of E.T., they had used Jell-O in a T-shirt for his movement. So I'd made up a batch of Jell-O, and we didn't end up using it, but it sat in this really crappy refrigerator, and it created a frosty cover. It had been in there for a couple weeks. So I took it out, and I thought, oh, this sounds pretty good. And we recorded it wild, because we didn't have that much, so we got probably a good 25 to 30 footsteps, and the editor cut that in over our footsteps that we used to get that different sound.
So it was crunchy on the top and soft on the bottom.
What about you, Andy? What's your...
Well, a hard sound effect is like you just kind of have to start somewhere, and it's, again, I keep talking about layering. So there's nothing, and we always pride ourselves, I'm sure you guys, there's nothing we can't create. There's no sound we can't make. But people think that, the big, huge action films are the hardest ones to do. They're very intensive, but it's the subtleties that are really hard. And small sounds, like somebody, just sort of flicking their fingers or typing, or little tiny sounds, or removing a silk negligee or something like that. Like, it's the subtle stuff that's the hardest stuff to do, I find.
Yeah. Paper.
Yeah, it's harder to sell.
Paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Anybody else?
In the film The Feast, was the dog barking sound effects of a dog barking, or was it Foley?
That was sound effects. The eating was
Okay.
Foley, but the barking was a sound effect.
Okay.
It's an interesting point, actually, because there's so many combinations. You mentioned gunshots.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we do, Foley artists do all the gun handling. We do the cocking, the shaking, the loading, whatever, but we don't actually do the gunshots. So there's a lot of instances where sound effects and Foley work together.
Oh, yeah.
And the amazing thing about handling a gun on film, it's very clacky and it makes a lot of noise, and there's a lot of moving parts, it seems, in a gun, but a real gun does not have moving parts. It's going to be very silent.
Don't use that gun.
Yeah. So that the gun life that you give to these weapons actually feels like you should put that down.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Don't shoot
It's very
gun.
dangerous.
How do you decide whether you record Foley for an entire scene in one take or isolated objects? Are you worried about sound spillage? If you
It's
have like
always
ambient noise?
isolated. You're essentially doing one thing at a time. You go through, what we do is we do all the feet for the whole movie, then we go back and then we do all the props for the movie, then we go back again and we do the cloth, whatever the character's wearing, like Batman's cape or a policeman with a leather jacket or just ordinary cotton clothes. So it's all isolated and basically done one sound at a time.
Oh, hi. I'm just wondering, what is your favorite sound, and then what's the favorite prop that you guys use so that the prop just goes everything?
Well, my favorite sound to do is paper. I love to do paper just because it's very, I think it's really gratifying after you do paper because it's just so specific. But my favorite sound to hear are tap shoes on wood. I love the sound of tap shoes for some reason. That's my.
And my favorite sound to hear is a covered wagon or a stagecoach.
Yeah,
That creak and the wood and the wheels and the horse and all that stuff. It's just so distinctive. You don't even need to see it. You know exactly what it is when you hear it.
My favorite prop is a wet chamois, actually, which you can manipulate in so many different ways. You can spread it out on the floor and lift it up from the center and get a kind of a sound, or blood and guts. It works really well for that kind of thing. And what we do for bones is we get a wet chamois and we squeeze all the water out and then put the pasta inside, so you've got a skin covering over a bone sound. I'm sure you guys do it the same way, but wet chamois, it's great.
Oh, yeah. That's essential for any Foley artist.
true.
Wet chamois are absolutely essential. And you can't have the fake ones. You got to have the real thing.
Hi, I have a question about restoring or redoing Foley. You mentioned that you worked on the 25th anniversary of E.T. I'm just wondering what the process is in working on a film that's been out for quite a while. Do you recreate sounds? And also, what is the rationale for the directors and producers behind doing that? Thank you.
I think with E.T. they were added scenes, I think. You don't remember? What was the other one we did, though?
Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah, Blade Runner. We worked on that one, too. That was, I think it was the 25th that came out. And they actually had us redoing running scenes and things like that. Maybe at the time, when we first started doing Foley, we really just had 3 tracks, like a single stripe and 3. So, yeah, we didn't really have that much. I mean, now it's out to so many tracks that...
You can have as many as you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the whole science of sound has changed so much in the last 20 years that if they want to re-release it, it's just not going to sound right. So they'll take it back and redo certain things to make it what people today expect to hear rather than 20 years ago, yeah.
You mentioned that when you do comedies, you do funny sounds, and you measure that by how much your crew laughs. What's the funniest sound you've ever had to recreate?
Well, I think that's why we showed Dodgeball, that the hit and the wrenches, we were laughing for days. And of course, fart sounds are always good, too. They get a good laugh. Yeah.
Okay. I have the mic. Hi. I'm sure that as you kind of move into the industry and have access to bigger budgets, there's pieces of tech that, are super impressive. But are there any microphones or pieces of technology that you've carried throughout the entirety of your career?
We're still using the same style. We use mostly these Sennheiser 416 directional mics, and we've been using them since I began. They're just the best mic for us for that particular job. And you guys might have.
Yeah, the same here. We've used the same microphones. I mean, the system that you record to has changed tremendously. Like you said, digital as opposed to analog. I had to learn to mix all over again because it's just a whole different mindset to record on digital. It doesn't record the same way as it records on analog. So the first thing I did on digital was Braveheart. And just recording a hand clap was a nightmare because digital is so sensitive to really high peaky sounds that it was a whole learning curve again for me. And then obviously the equipment's changed tremendously. So from 2-inch from single stripe to 2-inch to digital, and so their job hasn't changed that much.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like what we do is probably the way they did it back in the old radio days, essentially.
Yeah, that really hasn't changed much.
Hi. When you're at home doing boring domestic stuff, are you constantly on the lookout for good noises, sounds to use to take to work, or does that just drive you nuts?
All the time. I mean, I'm always listening to like that Brayer, just hearing sounds or shoes. hearing someone choose and thinking how great those sound. So yeah, and people always, I don't know about you, but they bring stuff by the stage all the time. Or from Finland, we have a Foley artist friend from Finland, and he sent us this, we call it a creaker, but it's something they have in the fields that they use for shearing sheep or something. It's a wooden frame thing that's just a great wood creak. And he was so nice, he sent it all the way from Finland. So.
I have people dropping stuff off to my house. They say, "Oh, you're the sound guy." And I had a woman drop off her mother's car who had just passed away and said, "My mother loved the movies, and if you can tell me every movie that you use the car in, well, I'll give you her car." And people have dropped off guns and honey extractors and all kinds of things. I have, because I'm situated out in the country and I have acreage, I have like a basement, a school portable, 3 sheds, and a barn filled to the brim with props. So.
Hi. When we saw the first clip showing how this is done, and you guys told us that when you first saw it, you thought it was so silly. How hard is it to stop from cracking up while you're doing it? Is that something that you've learned to control over time? But I just imagine you'd have to redo it because you're...
That has happened.
Yeah,
for
the
them.
giggles,
Yeah, the giggles
if something's really funny that we're working on and it just hits us, I don't know about you, Andy, but sometimes we can't even watch it. Like, okay, I can't do that cue. That's a good reason to have a partner.
Yeah. And what do you mean when you say you do it wild? What does that mean?
Not to picture.
Right. So
we're not looking at
watching.
anything. We're just making a sound.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
I assume, or from this, that you are all experts in your field and you have tremendous reputations. But my question is it your reputation that gets you a certain gig or job, or do you actually have to go out and apply for it, or does a director ask for you specifically, or how does that work?
You build up a clientele, and you do good work, and that's how you get the repeat business. Because we're out in the country and some people don't know us, we'll get somebody phoning up and saying, "Oh, I hear you have a house." We use our whole house for Foley, so we can do bathrooms and kitchens, and we bring cars into the studio, all that kind of stuff. And I always say, well, just send us a little piece and we'll do it for free. I can never believe that we would do something for free. And so we do a scene for them, and pretty much every time we get the job. So you still have to, you work from your experience and from your clientele, and you just do really good work.
Yeah, it's you build up a relationship, what we do with a supervising sound editor who would use us. But we also have to go out and solicit. Yeah.
And working at a studio like Warner Brothers, you would assume that you would get all the Warner Brothers films or all the Warner Brothers television shows, but instead it works very much, you're freelancers within a studio itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we're expected to bring work in. So, and Warner Brothers has 2 Foley stages, and so they've got 2 full-time day crews, 2 night crews, and then a weekend crew. So they have a lot of work coming in there. So it's pretty competitive. We're even competitive within our, we're
With
stage
each other,
1,
yeah.
the other's stage 2, but we are, it can get competitive about, I saw her having lunch with that supervisor. That's our supervisor,
Hi there. This question's for Alyson. I was wondering if you could talk about the Foley sounds you did for Twin Peaks, what it was like working with the sound team, and if you'll be working on the revival or not.
Yeah, we worked on Twin Peaks was really interesting because that was such a different show at the time. And it was, I think for us, it was working, David Lynch was there a lot, so it was kind of fun to be able to work with a director. And for television, that's really, really unusual. but we're not going to be working on the, I'm not sure who's going to be doing that, but yeah, it was just really interesting. It's fun, it's interesting. We don't get to work with directors that often, so it's kind of fun when you do work with a director that likes Foley and appreciates Foley, because most of them, I don't really know what it is, I don't think.
It's interesting because I was asked about Red Dead Redemption, and it's more dependent on the supervising sound editor, and secondly, the director, than it is the game or the revised Twin Peaks. It's
Right over here. Hi. So I was wondering, what kind of advice would you give to someone who doesn't have like a studio? Like, what are the do's and don'ts? Like, how could you set up your location and to get really good sound out of your Foley?
Well, the great thing in this day and age is these little Zoom stereo recorders. The thing is to just go out and do it. It's hard to get an internship at a Foley studio because there's just not that many around, and there's a lot. There's kind of a lot of people want to do it. So I always suggest is just work for free. You have to work for free to start, and if you're part of a school or something like that, you volunteer to do the sound, and just go out and record. If I've done snow footsteps where I'll just take the Zoom and I'll just go out and do the footsteps in the snow, and then bring it back. In the portable, I have a blackboard, and there's, a real blackboard sounds great when you want the squeaky chalk and all that stuff. So we just what I'll do is I'll take an iPad and just film the scene off the iPad, take it out to the portable, have somebody hold it, look at it, and do the writing on the board. You have to cross your T's and dot your I's. You have to make it really precise. That's one of the hard things to do, writing and drawing. And then you just bring it back into the studio and drop it into the track. It's so somebody wanting to do it, just go out and do it.
And learn Pro Tools.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. We have? We can see something.
Hi. I wondered if you have a favorite film that you really love the sound of, whether you worked on it yourselves or someone else's, and what did you love about it?
Well, my favorite film is Lolita, the Jeremy Irons one, because what we did was we went on location and did Foley. We packed up a truck, we had a mixing board, microphones, the whole bit, and we went in the middle of winter, so it was really quiet. We have that advantage that there's no external sound, and we went on location, recreated the whole Foley track in a proper room with stairs, and just kind of recreated it that way. So that was kind of special.
Yeah, my favorite was The Matrix, the first one, because they played so much of what we did, and it was so gratifying to watch it and have it sound so good and just work so well.
I think mine that I worked on was Inception, because there were so many different things with like the hallway turning and having to figure out if they're on the ceiling or where they are. And there were, just the beginning with the shaking lanterns of the glass, and I thought that was fun. But one of my favorite movies that I didn't even work on was The Little Prince. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it's an animated film, and within it they talk about there's stop animation with the book, but it's all in paper. So it's two totally different looks that just coincide really well together, and it just sounds beautiful.
It's a beautiful film.
Beautiful film.
Well, I would like to thank you guys for coming in all the way from LA and all the way from Uxbridge and telling us about the art of Foley. I think that, when we watch films, we're all watching them, especially after hearing them talk today, very differently, and hopefully we'll be picking up on a lot of these things, or maybe we don't want to be picking up on a lot of these sonic details. But thank you all for coming out, and thank you guys.